Tonight on Bridge City News, the RCMP under scrutiny as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau acknowledges systemic racism in our force. Mandatory measures to be in place for passengers entering Canada end of June and domestic travelers starting end of July. In the early days of the pandemic, the outlook seemed grim for bike shops, but now sales are so strong that many are finding that they're sold out of inventory.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Good evening, I'm Loris Alexander. Thank you for joining us. At a time when police conduct is under intense scrutiny, especially in regards to the treatment of visible minorities, video showing the arrest of a First Nations chief by the RCMP seems to be having an impact.
I think everyone who's seen this video has serious questions about what exactly happened, about how it happened this way, and about that use of force that we saw. That's why we're calling for an independent, transparent investigation that will get the answers that so many questions people are asking right now. There is important answers to have on these specific things, but also on the pattern that we are seeing of why so many Indigenous Canadians or racialized Canadians are afraid when they are interacting with the police. These are things that we need to address, and we're working on it together. We need race-based data to be able to understand exactly what's going on, whether it's in our communities, whether it's with policing, whether it's in financial sectors. Understanding the vulnerability that certain Canadians face in a systemic way is extremely important, which is why we have moved forward on disaggregated data, but why we will need to continue to do much more to better understand how our systems are unfair towards certain Canadians, particularly Black Canadians, Indigenous Canadians, and racialized Canadians. The events that have been brought to light over the past days highlight that without question there is systemic discrimination within our institutions, including within the RCMP. We need to move forward to correct that, and I continue to have confidence in Commissioner Lucky for the changes that she's made already within the force, and the more changes we need to make quickly to ensure that the women and men who serve in our police forces across the country, including the RCMP, can better serve their fellow Canadians, particularly Indigenous and racialized Canadians.
Ottawa has announced it's phasing in a new measure to reduce the risk of air travel.
I can announce that we're taking another step forward. Our government is mandating temperature screening for air passengers through a phased approach. First for those traveling to Canada, then for those traveling from Canada, and finally for those traveling within Canada. A passenger who has a fever will not be permitted to board their flight. Employees in the secured areas of airports will also be required to have their temperature checked.
The screenings will apply first to flights into Canada, then to outbound flights, and finally also to flights within the country. The Prime Minister acknowledged that screenings for fevers is not a reliable way to test for COVID-19, but calls it an extra layer of safety. With police behavior under intense scrutiny after the death of George Floyd and other incidents, the reality series Cops was canceled this week after 32 seasons.
In my car, I know you can't see them, but
There are lots of police shows on TV, but some now say they're too focused on showing police only as good guys. Even the Canadian-made kids show Paw Patrol is being questioned. Last week, when the show's official Twitter account called for Black voices to be heard, commenters came after Chase. There were tweets such as euthanize the police dog, defund the Paw Patrol, and all dogs go to heaven except the castrators in the Paw Patrol. The Alberta native Hasket berry, also known as the superfruit of the prairies, is fairly new to food markets. This comes with its challenges, of course. BCN visited the Lethbridge Farmers Market today and spoke to the owner of Indigo Springs Haskip on the difficulty of marketing this new berry and how their family business has been affected by COVID-19.
Because we can't do any sampling, that's been a challenge. So our sales are down from last year. Last year we only did later in the summer. It's been challenging anyways because it's such a new berry that nobody really knows what it is. Our challenge now, I guess, for the farmers market is we can't give samples out, so to get people to try it, because to spend money on something that they have no idea what it is, that's our challenge for now, I guess. So the people that try it, they very much enjoy it. It's a little more flavor than a blueberry, let's say. Yeah, we kind of try to sell it as a health product more than something that tastes good, but they do taste very good. So we got a lot of good response from it. Yeah, we basically only sell the jams and stuff. So, but yeah, even people that use the raw berry in smoothies and stuff, they really like the flavor.
Bike sales are rapidly increasing as people find new avenues to spend time during the lockdown. As parks reopen and the weather warms up, numerous individuals and families are making their way to Sun Cycle in Lethbridge.
It's crazy, yeah. I didn't expect it to be this busy at all. We were seeing a whole bunch of other shops and restaurants and stuff like that, not doing too hot, so we were kind of nervous and stuff like that. But yeah, we've been great. The last few months, we've been having better sales than we ever have and making people happy with new bikes and stuff like that. So it's been great. It's finally given people a chance to get outside and just be away from work. And having a bike, it enables you to go a little bit further and faster than walking or running. A lot of our entry-level mountain bikes, just getting people to, if they're getting into biking, they can try pretty much whatever they want. With a hardtail mountain bike, you can do in-city riding, on a pavement, or you can do a little bit of dirt and stuff like that as well. So it just gives people a more all well-rounded bike.
The government-backed Canada Mortgage and Housing Corp is tightening rules for mortgage insurance starting July 1st. A local mortgage broker and a real estate firm tells us why the move would make it harder for riskier borrowers. But nonetheless, sales have seen exponential growth.
Starting in March, so I think it was announced about March 15th, things were kind of scary for all of us in this industry. There was a period of time for probably about a month where really the brakes were hit. We were all kind of busy from leftover business from February, but that really tapered off in April. So we noticed a big and dramatic decrease in transaction volume through April that didn't really start picking up until May. So we were down about 50% of the transaction volume in April and about half of that less in May. So that would have been 25% or 20-ish% in May. And June's been gangbusters. We're really getting back on track, it seems. I know that we've got some mortgage changes coming out July 1st that many people are asking about.
CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, has come out with some policies to try to probably protect the consumer and protect the taxpayer, and that's by reducing the limit of debt service ratios. So the effect that it's had is for people purchasing homes, it's going to just have a reduction on that price point and the amount of mortgage that they qualify for. The net effect for everybody is we're going to see somewhere around a 10% reduction on their purchase price qualification. So between 9 and 10% depending on how all those numbers shake out. So somebody that was previously qualified for 200 is now looking at 180, and somebody that was 300 is now looking at 270-ish. The COVID situation has had an impact as the government tries to come through this and knows that we're a highly indebted society, including the government, and there are probably measures that they're trying to ease back the overall personal debt load as we see people's debt load continue to climb, and certainly in particular pockets and bigger centers. I think that this is a measure that's trying to reduce that price point and therefore carry less mortgages.
Recapping one of our top news stories, Ottawa has announced it's phasing in a new measure to reduce the risk of air travel. The screenings will apply first to flights into Canada, then to outbound flights, and finally also to flights within the country. The Prime Minister acknowledged that screenings for fevers is not a reliable way to test for COVID-19, but calls it an extra layer of safety. And a look at weekend weather. Today, a mix of sun and cloud with a 60% chance of showers early this evening, with risk of a severe thunderstorm, and a high of 24. Tomorrow, mainly sunny with a low of 9 degrees. Canada has one of the highest rates of this disease in the world, with an estimated 93,500 Canadians living with a neurological autoimmune disease. BCN's Paul Arthur speaks with Johanna Green, the director of the MS Society of Canada, about what it's like to live with multiple sclerosis. That interview is up next.
Multiple sclerosis is a disease many of us have heard about, but likely we don't know a lot about it, although there's a good chance you know someone with MS. So joining me today to talk to you about this is Johanna Green. She's the Northern Regional Director for the Alberta and Northwest Territories Division with the MS Society of Canada. You can check out their website at mssociety.ca. Good to have you with us, Johanna. Can you first off the top here just explain what exactly is multiple sclerosis?
Sure, Paul. Thanks so much for having me. MS is essentially a chronic autoimmune disease of the central nervous system, which is comprised of the brain, the spinal cord, and the optic nerves. So essentially in multiple sclerosis, the body attacks itself. It targets the myelin in MS, which is the protective covering over our nerves. And so as that covering is depleted, it can eventually lead to even nerve damage. And so the places where that damage happens and the type of damage can impact the type of MS that a person has and the disease course that they'll eventually encounter.
Okay, and what would the typical MS symptoms be? I mean, how much variance is there in the severity of symptoms from person to person?
A tremendous amount of variance in symptoms from person to person and also from time to time within the same person. Some of the most common MS symptoms include extreme fatigue, numbness, tingling in the limbs, muscle weakness. It can also lead to impairment of vision, bladder and bowel issues, even cognitive impairment for some people. So a whole host of different symptoms. And as I said, very unpredictable in terms of how they present for each person and from time to time within that same person.
Okay. Can you share with us what it's like to live with that MS and these symptoms that you've described? And so there's got to be some challenges that come along with that. And again, it's going to be varying, because, just as you described there. And the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, must put some added stress on anyone with MS.
Absolutely. One of the hallmarks of living with MS is that uncertainty, that unpredictability that it brings. For people living with MS, some of the more common issues that they encounter are employment because of the episodic nature of MS, which can mean that at times a person feels reasonably well and healthy, but at other times they have what we call relapses, during which their symptoms will flare up. So that can lead to real challenges within the workforce. An unfortunate statistic is that 60% of people living with multiple sclerosis are eventually unemployed, which, as you might imagine, can lead to very real income security issues, as well as access to equitable treatments and care and housing. So lots of different complexities. COVID-19 adds just another layer of complexity to this already complex and unpredictable disease. Obviously, people experiencing a lot of anxiety and wondering, what could this mean for me as I already live with this very difficult disease? So at the MS Society, we've pivoted quickly to ensure that while we can't deliver in-person programs and services for the safety of all, we offer a wealth of online resources, from webinars on mental health, physical health, featuring various experts, as well as peer support and different things online where people can connect with experts and other people living with the disease.
How prevalent is MS? Now, I understand that Canada, for whatever reason, has one of the highest rates of MS, and in particular, I've heard that here in southern Alberta, rates are quite high.
Canada does have the dubious distinction of having one of the highest rates of MS in the entire world. Approximately 77,000 Canadians live with the disease, and on average, 11 people are diagnosed each and every day. Here in Alberta, we also have among the highest rates of MS in the entire country. Lots of question marks around why that is, and certainly poses lots of questions and suspicions around environmental factors. Certainly in Alberta, we do see pockets of increased prevalence, and that's something that our amazing team of researchers are continuing to look closely into.
Yeah, I mean, because of the geographical correlations, right? Is there an environmental cause of MS? So it sounds like we don't have any solid evidence on that. But do we know anything about the cause of MS? Do we know what some of the possibilities could be?
So scientists continue to investigate. However, over decades of research, lots of important discoveries have been made in that area. Currently, the most common hypothesis around the cause of MS is that it's a combination of factors, including environmental factors, genetic predisposition, as well as some lifestyle factors that also influence a person's susceptibility to the disease. Things like smoking and obesity that we have learned can correlate to a person's potential for developing MS. And so in a way, empowering to know that there are things people can do to hopefully, help ward against the disease. And the idea of possibly preventing MS in the future is something that actually is part of our conversation now, which in and of itself is really exciting.
Okay, yeah, prevention definitely, something we need to focus on here if at all possible. What would the average age of onset be, and what's the earliest onset you've ever seen?
So people are typically diagnosed between the ages of 20 and 49. So those are the prime career, education, and family building years. So of course, a huge impact when to be diagnosed with a chronic illness at that point in life. We have seen children as young as 2 diagnosed, and people older than 49 are also diagnosed. But most, as I said, diagnosed really during the prime of their lives between 20 and 49 years.
Okay. I understand that women are much more likely to develop MS as compared to men. Do we have any, do we know why that would be?
That is among the far too many questions that we have rather than answers in the world of MS. Women are 3 times more likely than men to develop MS. And so with that come a host of different kinds of questions and important topics, certainly around pregnancy MS and those kinds of pieces. And there's lots of information on our website. There's a specific section on MS and women's issues in MS, which is, of course, super relevant given those prevalency rates.
Mm-hmm. Now, what kinds of treatment are available for MS? What's working?
So there's been a tremendous resurgence of options for people living with MS. Currently, there are 15 different what we call disease-modifying therapies for people living with MS, specifically with the relapsing remitting form of MS, where symptoms will come and go over time. And just in the last couple of years, we've also had the first ever treatment emerge for the progressive form of MS, which has been a huge breakthrough. Lots more work needs to be done in that area, but obviously now there is choice for people living with MS. We've moved from solely having injectable therapies, which, as you might imagine, having to take a needle every day isn't great for quality of life. So there are now oral options for taking some of those therapies. And so we're seeing people live much better with MS as a result of the emergence of some of those therapies. They, of course, aren't a cure, and many come with their own not so nice side effects, but certainly something to help improve quality of life as we continue to search out that cause and cure.
Mm-hmm. So again, these are helpful, but at this point, there's no cure that we know of, right? Are there any promising experimental treatments in development at this point?
Hugely exciting developments on this front. As I said, we, although we have that dubious distinction of having among the highest rates of MS in the entire world here in Canada, we're also home to some of the world's leading MS experts. So we are right in the backyard of some of the world's best researchers. Some of the areas of investigation right now that we're really excited about are areas such as myelin repair. So I talked about how MS sort of eats away at the myelin, the covering of the nerves. The current treatments really deal with addressing the inflammation that's caused by that, but they don't get to the bottom of actually repairing the myelin that's been damaged. So research underway right now is actually working on promoting repair of that myelin to actually possibly even reverse some of the symptoms of MS. I mentioned that recently there's been a new treatment for the progressive form of MS, which typically is the form that results in the most disability for people with the disease. So a lot more effort being invested into research into that area to hopefully be able to develop some new treatments sooner than later. Lots of work in the area of stem cells, and specifically there's a clinical trial underway right now around mesenchymal stem cells. So they're stem cells that come from the person's own body and are promising in that, unlike bone marrow transplantation therapy that involves intensive chemotherapy that's very risky, mesenchymal stem cell therapy has much less risk. So certainly something promising on the horizon. Also, areas of investigation that are of interest is what role the gut microbiome in our bodies might play in influencing MS. So investigation happening on so many fronts, and a really exciting time and a time of promise in MS research.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that with us. Now, when it comes to day-to-day life again, what kinds of activities are helpful for somebody with MS, like exercise, that sort of thing? Is that helpful, or is it just kind of basic? Yes, it's good to stay healthy overall for anybody.
Absolutely. Living a healthy, balanced lifestyle is among the most important things a person can do to be able to self-manage as much as that is possible their disease. Interestingly, years ago when someone was diagnosed with MS, they were told not to exercise. They were told that that was bad, it would exacerbate symptoms. Now things have changed almost 180 degrees. There's lots of evidence that proves that exercise in moderation and an appropriate level to your disease is actually very important in managing your disease. So we strongly encourage that. Actually, there are Canadian physical activity guidelines for people living with MS that you can find on our website.
Okay, great. And diet, of course, you want to eat healthy. Is there anything other than generally eating healthy? Is there anything really specific that scientists have discovered? This, eat this and it will help your MS stay stable or improve?
There are lots of different theories, and I would almost say fad diets out there that people have put out and have claimed, that have worked for them. In truth, most MS health experts really just, as boring as it sounds, advise sort of that high fiber, low fat diet and abiding by the Canada Food Guide.
Right, and likewise, holistic, kinds of treatments, naturopaths, whatever, homeopaths, that sort of thing. I mean. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, is there anything? I know there's probably lots of stuff on the internet. Some of it probably way out there, and other stuff maybe it actually does help. Is there any science that we know of that way? Is there anything natural that we know of that can help, or is it just basically still in progress being studied?
There are lots of other sort of lifestyle related choices people can make that can absolutely support managing their MS. Lots of people with MS benefit from physiotherapy, rehabilitation therapy, even massage. Stress management is another big piece in managing MS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, you can get depressed with this, that sort of thing. Just thinking that through, that would be hard on a person. So important then again to get some emotional support as well, right?
Absolutely. At the MS Society, making those connections, especially those peer-to-peer connections between people living with MS and other people who are living with it, who really understand it better than anyone else. So we actually have a peer support program, which is available to people. We connect a person living with MS who might be even newly diagnosed with someone else living with MS who's been trained, and they can connect online or by the phone as often as they would like to be able to get that support.
That's actually super. That sounds, bang on. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this with us here today. That was fascinating, actually. It was quite informative. So, Johanna, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Paul, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Prior to the pandemic, the Alberta economy was already going through some tough times, but how has COVID-19 affected the real estate market? Joining me now over Skype is Courtney Atkinson, a Lethbridge real estate broker with Atkinson and Associates. Courtney, welcome to the show. It's so nice to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So please tell us, what is the Southern Alberta real estate market looking like these days with all this COVID craziness going on? I would imagine overall sales have been probably less than they were prior to lockdown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we saw a fairly dramatic change in attitudes and real estate volume by about March. We were actually trending to have a very good year from a sales standpoint. So in January and February, we were up 5% and 10% respectively. And then things started trailing off as soon as the announcements were made that COVID was a real thing and it was having a real impact. And so we did see a pretty good dip through March and April for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, have people been afraid to purchase or even look at homes because of COVID? Or are you finding that it's just kind of business as usual? Those who want to buy a house are just willing to get out there and, look at houses?
Yeah, I would say that in March, there was a high degree of caution across the board. Everybody was really, really worried, and there was a lot of news feeds just really heavy with news about COVID. And I think it was really overwhelming for all of us. None of us really knew what to expect. None of us knew what the economy would look like in 4 to 6 weeks. And there was a lot of information, and I think it was just overload. And so that manifested through March being fairly quiet. And in real estate, those statistics will show up the following month. And so what that meant was that very few offers were written or received in March. And that meant that by April, we had about 50% fewer transactions happening than we did back in 2019 March. So there was certainly a significant change that happened in that period of time, but we're actually swinging back up. Like even in May right now, when you look back year over year, we're only down 25%, and the trend is looking really good for June. So it's almost as if the nerves that people had in March have kind of worked their way through, and people are feeling good again and starting to realize that, hey, listen, you know what? Our government's done a great job at social distancing and having programs in place to encourage us to be responsible. And now we're kind of seeing the fruits of those labors, I think. We really paid the price, I think, in March, and now we're starting to see that pay off.
For sure. I was actually going to ask you, too, since some of the restrictions have been lifted a little bit the past month or so, and particularly even like into this week, are you finding that people are feeling a little bit more braver now to get out there?
I would say so. When we first had the announcement made in March, like everybody, we implemented policies and procedures that would help protect our families and the families of our clients. And it was high alert. There's no question about it. I think everybody in the industry was very worried, and we weren't sure what that would look like. And so were all of our clients. Now that we've been through that and we've kind of heard the news load lighten a little bit and our caseload in Alberta lighten a little bit, and indeed in Canada, I think the attitudes of people have lightened and kind of, and certainly spring helps too, having the fresh air and getting people outside tends to be a little bit more kind of encouraging. And so, yeah, I would say the attitudes have changed. People have loosened up. We're seeing fewer people concerned about what the protocol is, fewer questions about how we're navigating the process. And I would say now the shift has been that it's more our elderly clients, folks that would have justifiable reasons for being more concerned, whether they're immunocompromised or, they're elderly. They want to know exactly what we're doing to protect them. And it's our duty to have those systems in place for sure, all across the industry. In many markets across North America, real estate was not deemed an essential service. And the feedback was that the market really wanted that. There were still a number of people that wanted to buy and sell, but for whatever reason, the governments were not allowing it. So we're very fortunate in that respect. And I think it's paid good dividends in our market. We're seeing it rebound quite nicely.
Yeah. So what kind of restrictions were you putting in place? And like right now, you're saying the seniors are mostly the ones that are concerned about that. What sort of things are you doing for them for safety?
Yeah, for our team, there were a few protocols that we implemented, and a lot of it we had already had in place. So much of what we do is virtually because of the nature of our office structure. We have offices across southern Alberta, so we meet a lot virtually anyway. And we've had virtual tour technology with our company for a long time, and so it really just meant that we were making sure that any prospective buyers had reviewed all of our virtual tours, that they'd reviewed all the photographs, that they had all the information about the property. And then for showings, we were limiting them to one person with one realtor, and they were expected to wash their hands in the property, wash their hands as they were leaving the property. Some were opting to wear masks, although that wasn't part of our protocol. At that time, it wasn't really something that was generally accepted to be beneficial, so we didn't implement that. But now for our clients that do prefer that, we certainly do. And the main thing is just maintaining that social distance and making sure that we're limiting as much exposure to people's properties as we can. And for those that want to go ahead and make an offer on a property, of course, there's other stakeholders that want to be involved. And if it's the property that they intend to move on, then we're okay letting a few more people in. And most sellers were okay with that too. They just didn't want open houses and that sort of thing. We're still not permitted to do open houses. So
yeah, that was actually one of my questions. I was wondering if are you still holding open houses? And also, has this affected, or did you see mostly in the springtime, people not putting their houses on market as much because they don't necessarily want a bunch of strangers, traipsing through their house? Did you find that at all?
yeah, good question. I think to address the first part of that with the open houses, it wasn't a major concern for us. In fact, we were happy that that was the case. It limited exposure and really caused us to be able to meet people who were very interested in particular properties, and then gave us an opportunity to very carefully mitigate risk for the sellers that we represent. And then on the other side of things, I think that the other folks that were, attempting to list their properties and were thinking about what they were going to do in the spring, I would say that there was a fair chunk of them that were deferring through that March timeframe. But the interesting thing that happened is that when they did hit the market, we were seeing uptake happen really quickly. We were seeing a lot of competitive offers, a lot of multiple offers, a lot of really strong offers coming to the table. So it was almost like there was pent up demand in the buyer side that wasn't being met by sellers. So when they finally realized that there was still opportunity, I think they were met with enthusiasm and encouragement. So it was good news.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, I'm just wondering how helpful was the use of your technology? Like you were saying, you kind of used that a little bit. But for example, like using a drone, for example, to do like a virtual tour or anything, was that really being utilized more so than normal?
Well, I wouldn't say more so than normal for us, because we do that with all of our listings. So the virtual tours, the aerial photography, professional interiors and exteriors, that's just part of our program. I would say across the industry, the access and the requirement and the expectation that the market would have for those things certainly went up. I would say one of the most interesting things for us was that, we had been meeting by Zoom or Google Hangouts as a company for a long time. And the thing that we really noticed, and I'm sure this is the same for a lot of your viewers, we were just really missing each other. Like as a company, we really just missed seeing each other around the office and doing our work together. And despite seeing one another on a computer screen, we were just starting to feel like, oh my gosh, when is this going to get over? And I think collectively as a community, a lot of that happened at the same time. We were keen to get back to work and see one another. Folks were keen to get out and see properties. They were keen to get moved again. And so I think collectively, it's almost like we all had these same feelings at the same time, and the market started picking up again.
I think you're right. I think there's that pent up energy. People are just tired of being at home. So now you're an essential service, but you're saying your office actually was closed. You guys were working from home for the most part, other than when you were showing homes. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So we had this open for cashing checks for deposits and things like that. So we would typically have somebody coming by the office twice a day to look after those types of things, offers and that sort of thing. But we were completely virtual, and we can conduct ourselves virtually fairly simply. We've done that for a long time. So it wasn't a real shift for us. It wasn't like we had to figure out how to operate our business without a building. It was just frankly that we're so collegial, like many people in the industry. We just wanted to see one another, and we missed the client engagement too, right? And so, yeah, you're right. It was so nice to get back out and see people in the community. And I just think personally, there were days that went by where I was working from home and I didn't even leave the house. Like that's not healthy, right? And I think collectively as a community, we all realized that hey, listen, you know what? There is a risk out there and it is serious, but at the same time, so is our mental and physical health, and we need to look after those things too.
Yeah, 100%. Now, you had mentioned earlier that you recently have gotten some really strong offers. So does that mean that home values have not necessarily declined? Have they increased since the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't say that. We've been in a fairly balanced or buyer's market since about 2010. As you well know, Alberta's had a tough time through many changes over the last decade with oil prices and difficulties with our economy. And that's manifested in real estate prices not appreciating in any real measurable way here in Southern Alberta in that time frame. That said, one of the fears that a lot of our sellers had in the beginning, back in March, was that there would be a dramatic depreciation in property values in a very near term. And that really didn't show up for us. we're seeing properties transact at approximately the same prices that they would have earlier in the spring. I think that competitiveness in the marketplace and those multiple offers was more a matter of demand. Buyers kind of anxiously waiting for sellers to put this right property up on the market and then acting very quickly. But that didn't necessarily have a change on prices.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So, Courtney, what is the average home price now in Lethbridge?
Yeah, so we're about 285 when you look across southern Alberta, Lethbridge specifically, and that's been fairly consistent for a while. One of the things that skews the average house price tend to be the number of properties that are sold above the average and below the average. So I think what we're going to see this year, if we kind of try to predict how things are going to go, and this is also related to some of the mortgage changes that happened through the B20 legislation and some of the things that have just recently come out. We'll likely see some of the more expensive properties stagnate a little bit, possibly not transact, and maybe those folks withdraw from the market. So that could potentially just pull that statistic down a little bit. It's not necessarily reflective of the overall values in our marketplace. It just means that there's not as much uptake of those listings, let's say in the 5, 6, or 800,000 range. And not to say that they don't sell, but the volume of those particular type of listings in a year like this might not be as high as it was last year, for example.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. So you mentioned 285 is about the average price, but what price range is selling the most currently?
Yeah, great question. So there's a lot of activity once you get up to about $350,000. Once you go above that, it does slow down a little bit. And we've sold properties, well north of that. I mean, we've sold a couple properties over $1 million already this year. So those properties are transacting. It's just the volume of them isn't quite what it might have been in another year. So right up to about 350, I would say there's good action, and then it kind of tapers off a little bit after that. You just got to adjust your expectations in terms of the time on market and how long it might take to find an attracted buyer if you're listing, say, a $500,000 or $600,000 house.
Interesting. And what are where are the interest rates headed these days?
Yeah, great question also. So interest rates are right around 3% plus or minus, depending on a few different variables. They're again all-time low. In times like this, the government's motivated to keep money in the markets. They want to keep people spending. They want to make sure that there's some liquidity out there. And so they're making money accessible to people. And as you know, there's lots of programs for businesses and for families to kind of keep people afloat during these difficult times. And they want to make sure that mortgages are affordable as well. Now, there's a little bit of shyness out there in terms of the qualification criterion. So they've tightened up in some of those ways a little bit just to make sure that they're doing additional income verification, making sure that people are still employed, even though they might have been laid off for a little while. So they're doing extra due diligence. But indeed, the prices of mortgage rates are incredible. So we're saying to everybody, hey, listen, if you're secure in your position and you're thinking about making a move, I know every realtor says this all the time, but really money's never been cheaper. So it is a great opportunity for that.
That's interesting. So what advice would you have for, like, say, a young couple trying to get things together to buy their first home? What do they need to do to get things in place financially?
One of the most important things that a person can do is just save. I think in our society, we're so drawn by things that we see on Facebook and Instagram, and you can buy pretty well anything with a couple touches of your phone on Amazon, and it's so easy to spend money. And I think collectively as a society, we've really gotten away from saving. And so one of my personal hopes that this pandemic has brought on, at least in my hope, is that it'll create a generation of savers. And so my advice to any young person is to make sure that you're saving 10, 15% of your income, put it away, just pretend that it doesn't exist, save that money. It might take you a year to save up money to buy your first home, but it is one of the best investments. And even if we're not in a market where properties are appreciating dramatically, the fact is that it's still substantially cheaper than renting, and you've got a place to call home forevermore. And it can begin one of those things that sets you up for a very successful life and a successful retirement. So we're big advocates of that. And I think one of the other small pieces that people don't realize, especially when they're younger, they'll begin that saving process and they'll start to feel that they've got some cash in the bank and they feel really encouraged by that. So then they go out and buy a quad or buy a truck or a boat or something. And of course, those things have a dramatic impact on your ability to qualify for the mortgage when the time comes. So what we say is, buy your boat the day after you take possession of your house. You want that new truck? Just wait till the day after you've moved into your house. It's much easier to get financing on a new vehicle than it is to get financing on a mortgage. So just defer those big purchases until after you've already taken possession, because you'll still get qualified, but it might not work the other way around.
Wow, that is great advice. Thank you so much for that. Courtney, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Take good care.
That is Courtney Atkinson, real estate broker with Atkinson and Associates here in Lethbridge.
Polls consistently show that Canadians care about the environment. So it is interesting to see that we often read articles criticizing Canada for having a poor environmental track record. So we're going to take a look at that record to see if that is true or not. Today's guest is Elmira Aliakbari, Associate Director of the Centre for Natural Resource Studies at the Fraser Institute. She is the co-author of a study, Environmental Ranking for Canada and the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And you can actually check out that study online at fraserinstitute.org. So welcome to Bridge City News, Elmira.
Thanks, Paul, for having me.
You bet. Well, can you first of all tell us why Canada often seems to end up with a low ranking compared to other nations? Are we doing that poorly?
So, as you pointed out, in recent years, several reports from other organizations have presented Canada as an environmental laggard, ranking us near the bottom of the list of OECD countries. But these reports didn't always use the most meaningful and relevant environmental measures to compare countries. And as a result, these reports unfairly presented Canada's environmental performance in some respects. So let me give you an example to make it more clear. Past reports, when they wanted to evaluate air quality across countries, they simply looked at emissions per person. In other words, they measure total emissions in each country and then they adjust that by the size of population. But when we want to evaluate air quality, the key question is not about emissions per person, but is about the exposure of people to air pollution. A few large industrial operations in some Canadian provinces may skew that metric that was used in past reports upward, but that may not necessarily translate into actual exposure to air pollution in urban areas where most people live. So when we are evaluating air quality, it's really critical that we account for people's exposure to air pollution, but that critical factor was missing in past reports. So we try to develop an improved methodology to correct those past mistakes, and we closely followed the methods that were developed by some economists at Yale University and Columbia University, and we compared and ranked 33 high-income OECD countries across a wide range of environmental measures that relate both to the protection of human health and the preservation of ecosystems. Overall, in this study, we have used 17 environmental indicators that cover key areas such as air quality, water quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and agriculture. And our study provides an aggregate score ranging from 0 to 100 across 17 environmental indicators to provide an easy way to understand how Canada performs relative to other countries when it comes to protecting the environment. And we have found that Canada performs relatively well. Canada ranks 12 out of 33 countries with a score of 67, which is above the OECD average. So contrary to some previous claims, we see that Canada has a good environmental record. And this is something that I guess all Canadians should be proud of.
Right, that's good to hear that perspective. Like you point out, the context matters, doesn't it, right? And especially when we're dealing with human health, okay, it's not just with the ecosystems, but they kind of both need to be measured there. That's what counts, I think, as well. So Canada 12th out of 33, so that's pretty decent. Which country, by the way, was on the bottom? And on the flip side, which one ranked in the top spot?
So the best performer was Sweden, followed by New Zealand and Finland. Sweden obtained a score of 80 out of 100, and the worst performer was South Korea.
Now, is there any, do we know offhand, like, is there anything that, big red flag that jumps out? This is why South Korea is way on the bottom and why Sweden is so much better than everybody else?
So it's just, we have used 17 environmental indicators, and we have aggregated all those indicators to create an overall index. And when we have done that, we see that, like Sweden is the best performer, while South Korea is the worst performer with a score of 41.4, which is way lower than the OECD average.
Okay. I'm curious, how did the U.S. do, our next door neighbor here?
Yes, so the United States performs slightly better than us.
Wow.
The United States, ranks 10 out of 33.
But pretty close. We're pretty comparable then. Okay.
Yeah. There was little difference.
And just to get some perspective on this, now you're again we have South Korea in the bottom, Sweden in the top, and we have again 11 nations, I guess, that rank better than Canada. Now, is there a large difference there, a big gap, or are we relatively speaking pretty close to these other countries, even the ones that are ahead of us?
When we compared Canada's score to the top performers, such as Sweden or New Zealand, we found that there was really little difference between us and those top performers. For example, the second place, New Zealand, obtained a score of 74.7, which is not much higher than Canada's score. Overall, most of the top-ranked countries in our study cluster closely together, and that's why we see that there is really little difference between us and top.
Right, so it's a little bit, maybe if I can use this analogy, when we watch the Olympics, the top 10 finalists running in the 100-meter sprint, it's amazing. They're finishing this close. The difference between top spot and 10th spot, maybe hundredths of a second, right? I mean, they're all good, right? There's no one here that go, oh man, that guy really sucks. No, they're all incredibly good. So Canada is doing well. So, okay. Why don't we start off with the air quality ranking? How did we do there?
So Canada performs exceptionally well on air quality. In order to accurately measure air quality and its impact on human health, we have used two measures in this study. The first one examines the extent to which people are actually exposed to harmful fine particulate matter. Fine particulate matter is a common and key air pollutant that includes smokes, dust, and fumes. And on that measure, Canada performs really well. We ranked 4. The second measure related to air quality examines the portion of the population in each country exposed to unsafe air pollutants levels set by the World Health Organization. So Canada is a top performer on that measure, with 100% of Canadians exposed to levels of fine particulate matter that comply with the air quality standard. So overall, Canada performs exceptionally well on that area.
Yeah, interesting. Is there any particular reason? Does it have to do with our population being spread out so widely across the country? We have smaller population areas. Is that something that affects that, or?
So in this study, we haven't really looked into reasons behind any particular finding or ranking. So I cannot really comment on any reason that has caused basically this great result for Canada or any other countries.
But the good news is we've got good air quality. All right. How about water? That's another big one, of course. And I understand this is based on 2 indicators that assess the health risks posed by water pollution, access to improved sanitation facilities, and also access to improved water sources. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yes, as you mentioned, for water quality, we have used several indicators. Just the two that you just mentioned are related to water quality and its impact on human health. And on those two measures, we ranked 13. But I should note that on those measures, almost all the countries performed really well. So there was really little difference between us and top performers. With respect to water quality, another key indicator that we looked at was wastewater treatment. This is a key driver of water quality. And this indicator tracks the portion of wastewater from municipalities, household, and industry sources that are treated before releasing into the environment. And we ranked 17 on this measure. But it's important to note that there are a number of measures in our study on which almost all the countries do well. So even if Canada's ranking is relatively low on a particular measure, there is often little difference between us and top performers.
We shouldn't be losing any sleep over your ranking 17th, I guess, for wastewater treatment compared to some of the other countries, because it is actually very close, is what you're saying, right? So,
Exactly.
okay, interesting.
We're ranking relatively low because we are comparing ourselves against a group where everyone is doing well.
And you had also another rank. We apparently finished 4th, I think, for the intensity of use of our water resources. What does that mean, the intensity of use?
Yes, so that measures, that's another indicator that we've used, and that measures freshwater withdrawal as a percentage of total water resources. To put it simply, this indicator compares countries' abilities to ensure sustainable management of water resources. And on that measure, we ranked really well, and we ranked 4.
That's good to know. Now, greenhouse gases, of course, this is a big one everybody talks about a lot. So how did we do here, and what do you actually base that ranking on?
For greenhouse gas emissions, we have looked at 3 indicators. One of the indicators that we looked at was carbon intensity, which measures carbon dioxide emissions adjusted by the size of the economy. On that measure, Canada ranks 31st out of 33 countries. But, when we are looking at this result, we should also keep in mind that Canada is a massive country with with cold climate and with long transportation distances and even large natural resource sector. Clearly, the size of a country's land mass drives some of its need for energy and its subsequent greenhouse gas emissions. Many of the OECD countries that are performing better than Canada on this measure are smaller countries with milder climate, with higher population density, meaning that these countries have less energy needs compared to Canada. So we should keep in mind these basically natural limitations that Canada has when we're comparing Canada to other countries. Another indicator that we looked at, which is related to greenhouse gas emissions, is low emitting electricity production. This indicator measures the share of total electricity that is generated from low emitting energy sources such as nuclear or renewables. And on that measure, Canada performs really well. We ranked 8 out of 33 countries.
Okay, yeah, again, like you say, the context actually does matter. Again, size of the country, what are the actual energy needs? It is cold up here. In Vancouver, you guys are doing not too badly, but hey, Lethbridge gets pretty cold too. So now Canada only ranked 29th for forest cover. Does that mean, we're overcutting our forests? Can you explain that one?
So with respect to forest cover, despite preserving its forest cover over a decade, Canada ranks relatively low. As you mentioned, it ranks 29. And the reason is that while we have preserved our forests over a decade, other countries have somewhat expanded their forest cover over the same period. That's why we rank relatively low when compared to other OECD countries.
Okay, so we got to get busy and plant some more trees. All right. On the biodiversity front, how did we compare with other nations as to the number of species we have at risk?
So yes, we looked at that. That indicator, which measures the number of species that are in risk of extinction as a percentage of total known species, and we ranked relatively well. We ranked 12 out of 33 countries.
Okay. Of course, Canada, known for a large agricultural industry here. How was our record on environmental issues there related to agriculture with fertilizer use, for example?
Canada has a really good record on environmental issues related to agriculture. So among the main concerns relating to agriculture are excessive use of fertilizers and intensive use of pesticides. So we compared and ranked countries based on the intensity of using fertilizer in agricultural system, and Canada ranks really well. We ranked 4. And we also compared countries on average pesticide use per area of cropland. And again, we ranked relatively well. We ranked 11 out of the 33 countries.
Okay. Well, I'm up against the clock here, Elmira, but big picture, Canada sounds like does not have any major reasons to be overly concerned with our environmental record in comparison to other OECD nations, correct?
Exactly. The evidence is clear. Most developed countries have established sound environmental protection regimes, and Canada fares well when compared to other high-income countries.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today, Elmira. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Elmira Aliagbari, co-author of the study Environmental Ranking for Canada and the OECD. You can actually check that out online for yourself, FraserInstitute.org. And on behalf of all of us here at BCN, thank you so much for watching today.